our second
Yes.
episode, if you can believe it, of Couch to 4K. I wish I could take credit for that title, but I can't. That's all you, Mr. Caulfield.
Well,
And I'm here with Mike Caulfield, and I'm Jim Groom, and we're going to talk
today
today
we're gonna
about Invasion of the Body
today we're gonna be
Snatchers.
podcasting.
Truly
Truly
podcasting.
podcasting. So format for this, Jim. We're going to come up. We decided that
We're
we're going to come up with a format after this. Like we'll get to talk a little and discuss what the format is. But right now we're just winging it. So let me Jim. Actually, you said that this is the one that you wanted to do, and so why don't you talk about what made you think that this would be a good choice? What attracts you to this title?
Well, a couple of things. Actually, it was kind of inspired by our discussion last week about Outland and some of the comments you were making about how not only is it science fiction, but it's a very much a noir on top of its Western
Yeah,
roots. And I think having watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers recently and being a huge fan of this movie since I saw it in the 70s and since, um, I was really taken by the fact that how well this film gender bends between being a horror,
yeah,
also being noir, and then also just being a real good
yeah,
thriller
yeah.
and quite psychological and it's very intellectual at the same time. So I was fascinated by that, and I think it really matches well and kind of bridges almost. If we talked about Alien and Outland, I think you would put this film almost as a maybe primer even to
Yeah,
Alien,
maybe.
which then leads us to something like
Well,
Outland.
there's some things around that, right? So, like, part of what they kind of set that stage for people that might have not listened to the last one. Part of what we talked about last time was you had sort of this conspiracy thriller genre that emerged really in the 60s, in the 70s. I mean, like Manchurian Candidate is a good sort of early example of that, right? But this sort of conspiracy thriller genre that emerged and then post Watergate, becomes very much the thing, like Parallax View, and and then even the historical stuff, like all the President's Men and stuff, and that kind of comes up in the 70s, and then what we were discussing is, in the late 70s, you see that conspiracy um, thriller genre meld into some other stuff, right? And so at first view, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is sci-fi with that sort of conspiracy thriller genre to it. But it's also got like these other elements, right? It's got this sort of noir element to it. It's got actually, and that might be the entire ingredients of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Outland again is a Western, and people talk about that High Noon thing, but it comes in as a conspiracy thriller that turns into High Noon, right? Like that first part of that first half of Outland is almost pure conspiracy thriller, right? Looking like the drugs, the weird actions of everybody around, very similar in some ways to the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is like there's just something weird going on in this place, and we haven't put our finger on it. And this kind of carries that through. And it arrives at a really interesting time, too. It arrives, of course, as some of the counterculture of the 70s is beginning to become, is beginning the transition. Like the 80s doesn't really start in the 80s, right? The 80s kind of starts in the late 70s. And some of that counterculture motion is already sort of petering out, and we're moving into the 1980s. We're moving into a different sort of phase of history, and there's a lot of anxieties about that.
That's a really good point, and it actually really focuses on where this film takes place. So this film is the epicenter for hippie culture, right? This is San Francisco. And you talk about the 60s into the 70s, and it's also, you got the kind of, you know, me culture that comes up, the self-help books, the beat culture goes to the hippies, goes to self-help in the 70s, and the crystals, here we come. And I love that San Francisco is as much a character in that transformation you're
Yeah,
talking
in
about.
a late
One of
a late a late edition too, I would say. Like if you read the
Absolutely.
history, initially they were going to do sort of the small town sort of thing with this film, and Kaufman, fairly late in the rewrites, is like, no, actually, I want this to be about San Francisco. It's Kaufman was in love with the San Francisco of the early '70s, right? And very much says that San Francisco of the beatniks, like the hippies, the weirdos, is the culture that
Yeah.
he liked and the culture he saw disappearing. And it occurs very late to him. And is it Richter that he's co-writing the screenplay with? Um, Christian very late. No, wait a second. This isn't actually about small town America. This is about what's happened. Like, this is about precisely what you're saying, Jim. Like, this is about if this could happen to San Francisco, then where are we now, right? Yeah,
Exactly. Like, and there's a lot of nice pieces he builds into that. And we could talk, somewhat extensively about his commentary, which I'll talk about my experience with the 4K maybe versus
yeah,
yours. But one of the things he said that really, just to circle back to your point about the 80s starts in the 70s, and this is of a particular moment, a few weeks before this film comes out, the Jonestown
yeah,
massacre takes place. And so, like, you really start to see, that's the final nail in the coffin of the cults of the
yeah,
60s and 70s. And, you wake up, here comes Ronnie Reagan, like, we're moving
yeah,
right into the 80s.
yeah.
So it's interesting that this movie coincides with that
And
event.
kind of, yeah, kind of. And again, so we were talking about this, and maybe we should get to the beats here, and kind of walk through the film because I
I
think we
would love
can.
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's go
Do
through
you
the.
want me to share that?
Yeah. Uh,
I
yeah.
will. Mike, I would be happy to.
Okay.
I'm like you know what I am? I'm like your co host. It's your show,
Hey.
baby. I'm just going, I'm here for the ride.
Oh, I don't think that's true at all. But yeah. So let's talk a little bit, walk through it. So it begins with this. It begins with this basically stuff floating through space. It's the last time we'll see the sort of spaciness of this, right? It floats through space and kind of lands, and there's an uncredited appearance of Robert Duvall, who is swinging on a swing in a park, and the main character, one of the main character, Elizabeth Driscoll, who's played by Brooke Adams, comes to the park and sees a flower in that park and finds it interesting. And of course, what's going to develop over time is that these flowers are the mechanism by which the aliens take over Earth. Now, I think it's really interesting that it begins with Elizabeth in her experience. Donald Sutherland is going to be really central to this. But it begins with Elizabeth and her experience. And I think the next piece is kind of crucial. Elizabeth goes home and she sees her boyfriend uh, in um, in sort of his mode. And his mode is very distracted. It's a relationship that's not really working, and he's watching a game on TV. He seems to be kind of disconnected from her. He seems to be just focused on the TV. He's got the TV headphones on, which I think is kind of a really interesting touch of that. Um, and you see a relationship that is, two real people, but having lost a bit of its pep. She wakes up the next morning, and here's what I'll pass it over to you. She wakes up the next morning, and what? I'm sorry. Then we go over to Donald Sutherland, who turns out to be a health inspector, catches a turd in a restaurant, and we
You mean a caper?
what's that? Yeah, he calls Elizabeth. So we're kind of bringing these characters together. He calls Elizabeth, and they flirt. It's clear that they kind of have a slightly flirty relationship that has never progressed beyond that. But then we get to really the inciting act of the movie, which is Jeffrey wakes up wrong. And so I'll hand it over to you there, Jim, if you want to talk about what Jeffrey's doing that is a little bit different than what Jeffrey usually does.
He's actually cleaning up some series of ashes. And one of my favorite things about this movie is the way in which you connect the individual acts within the home. And they're all real spaces and filmed in real spaces. And I do another podcast with Michael Branson Smith about the family. And whenever we do a movie that's filmed in real spaces, he goes crazy. He's like, "This is the best because it's filmed in a real space." And this is so true about Invasion of the Body
Yeah.
Snatchers. You know, I think there's only one set on the whole space, but this is this nice brownstone in San Francisco. He's cleaning up a series of ashes that we quickly learn may be his other self, and then he walks it out to the conveniently placed garbage
Yep.
truck in front of his house. And the whole connection between the individual in that space and the public infrastructure in this movie is so interesting to me, and it works all the time consistently with these little hints. And again, so it's at that point that what's happening in the house and what's maybe related to this strange flower that's been brought home immediately becomes a citywide pandemic, if you will, right? Like it just takes like 5 seconds in
Well,
this movie
and
to set it up
we
brilliantly.
also see something that, like, here's the thing: if you've watched, this is going to come up multiple times in this, but if you've watched this film once, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it so wrong.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people here that are probably tuning in thinking, I've seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, there's a couple things. First of all, you might have seen it on TV. You might have seen it on VHS. We're going to talk about that when we get to the 4K release and what the 4K release brings. But even beyond that, just when you watch it the second time, it is the whole world is already taken over at the beginning, right? So you're going through it. The first time you watch it, you're like, how will they survive, and how will they stop the invasion? You watch it the second time, it's over. It's over the minute he's bringing out that stuff. He puts this weird pod ashes of something that we'll learn about later as part of his transformation. He puts it into the back of that garbage truck. You know what is in the back of that garbage truck? Layers and layers of pot ashes from other people. Like, the city is done. You're at this. And so it's so weird. The first time you watch this, you're like, how will they resist? Will they rise up? Will they stop it? This is the inciting act of the plot. And it is also on a first watch. On a second watch, it's an indication that everything is over. It is done. It is humanity is toast, right? So I find that so interesting. The other piece of this, as being the inciting acts incident, is, we talk about self-help and so forth. And a lot of this is going to be about feelings, but he gets up, he's more productive, he's more efficient, right? And that's what she notices is wrong, even though they had this hollowed out relationship before, right? Now he's wrong in a different way. And it's more disturbing to her that he's getting up, he's cleaning up the house, he's bringing out the trash, he puts on a suit.
He's not like a bad husband.
Actually, on a second watch, could this be any less subtle? Oh,
that is one of my critiques of this film. Like, as I watch it again, I'm like, there is a certain amount of spoon feeding of some of the themes,
it's
right?
funny,
Like,
though. I
he's
feel
not
like the
playing
first watching
low-key.
it doesn't feel as spoon fed, but once you know, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like, yeah. So Elizabeth consults the Donald Sutherland character, Matthew, and comes to his apartment, and in a beautiful, beautiful scene, they just have such a friendly chemistry that's slightly flirty, but never feels sordid. Just feels like two people who have feelings for each other. Nothing's going to happen with that. Enjoy each other's company, and that's good. And there's sort of a famous there's a famous line here. She tells him that something's wrong with him, and he says that they should go see Kibner, the psychologist, and that Kibner could figure out maybe what's going on with Jeffrey, whether Jeffrey was having an affair, had become gay, or whether he had a social disease or had become a Republican. So there's that's there, and then there's a sort of a famous scene here which I love, one of my favorite scenes, where they're in the backyard, and Donald Sutherland's character says to Elizabeth, can you do that? Can you still do that thing with your eyes? She says, maybe I'm crazy, right? And he says, can you still do that thing with your eyes? If you're not crazy, do that thing with your eyes. And then she does this weird little thing where she rolls her eyes, one like clockwise and the other counterclockwise in this really weird way, and they both laugh. And he says, you can do the thing with your eyes. That shows you're not crazy, which I think we'll come back to there. But this starts to get steamrolling. Next, we have a laundry owner says his wife is not his wife, and so you're starting to see this pop up all around. And again, all behind them, all these scenes. When you watch it twice, it's like it's everywhere already, right? But he's starting to see these things. He goes to get his laundry, and the laundry owner says his wife has changed, right? Kevin McCarthy runs into traffic when they're driving. This actor from the first and says, "They're coming. You're next. They're coming. You're next." Lands on the car. Police restrains him. Matthew calls in the witness report. Again. So now we get to the book part.
And what he says,
Yeah.
actually, Michael, is he says they're already
Oh,
here.
that's true. Yeah.
And that really backs up your whole reading of, as soon as her husband goes out to bring his ashes out, it's done.
They're already
it's as
here.
if McCarthy had been running for 20 years, from the outskirts of San Francisco.
Don't know, he ends the first film, that's him running, and apparently he's been running all over California.
Exactly, which I
like
love.
Forrest Gump, like conspiracy thriller Forrest Gump.
And it's brilliant. I love Kaufman bringing it in there, and there's this whole scene they talk about, like, someone when he was basically finding the turd / caper at a restaurant. Some of the restaurant workers went out and smashed his window with a wine bottle, and as McCarthy is coming to the car, the broken window is still there, and it's all splintered out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of very similar to what's happening with this, very quickly moving takeover of the pods.
Yeah.
And everyone becoming a pod people. And it's just a beautiful, you're always seeing this film through that
like
lens.
A fractured image or something. Like there's something about that. They're driving around and they're already here. It's a key piece of this. Then we get to what I think is probably one of your favorite pieces of the. I'm just guessing. We get to the party. So now remember, at the beginning, part of what's happened here is that Matthew is a little bit dismissive of Elizabeth's concerns about Jeffrey changing. He's starting to get it, like with the person in the laundry, with McCarthy. He's starting to see this, starting to come around. But he said, let's go to see Kibner, this famous psychologist who has a book out that he wrote in 6 months, apparently, a book out every 6 months, as the Jeff Goldblum character will later depressingly say, who's a poet who writes a line every 6 months, as Jeff Goldblum's great in this, by the way. But they get to this book party, and this book party, in some ways, I feel like when we talk about the pod here, which Elizabeth talks about when she first finds that pod, she says it's a Grex, Grex, a Grex, which is a hybrid of two different species that come together, produce something new. She looks up Grex and reads a definition of it. And in that early scene, she says, Grexes are known. They were widespread in post-war devastated Europe. They're known for taking root on devastated ground, right? And so one of the questions of this film is going to be, why is San Francisco devastated ground? Like, what is it that's become so empty about San Francisco? And I feel like we get a little bit of that at the book party. So we arrive at the book party, and there's Kibner, and I'll let you reveal who Kibner is, Jim, and take it from there.
Well, I do. You're right. This is a favorite scene for me. And Leonard Nimoy, who before seeing this film I only knew as Spock. I think most people did. But after this film, you knew Leonard Nimoy was pretty awesome as an actor in his own right. And I think that's one of the things Kaufman really established and wanted to establish for Nimoy. But it's almost like Spock was so big a character, no one could get out from the presence there. So anyway, Leonard Nimoy plays a self-help guru, a San Francisco self-help guru who's basically saying like all of the conventions of the family and everything else have been lost, and as a result, society is in dismay, and we're moving backwards. And so everybody's fears right now about these pod people needs to be traced back to family values and all the traditional. And I also read this as kind of like the boomers making that jump from those radical 60s and the kind of sit-ins to this fucking guru self-help people, and like this is that transition.
And who else makes this connection? Pauline Kael, right? This is Pauline Kael's main read of the film. And Pauline Kael, for people that don't know, one of the most famous and she places this firmly in what is it called, the human empowerment, or what was it called? There's a sort of name for that particular sort of self-help culture of the late 70s. EST was another name for it. It was based around a particular guy. But this idea that we're going to engage in self-improvement as our real endeavor, and that pulls together a bunch of the stuff you see here. It's at the nexus of this idea of our psychology as a locus primarily for self-improvement and not for experience, that really pulls all these streams together. It pulls together Jeffrey getting up, cleaning. What's wrong with Jeffrey cleaning the house, right? What's wrong with Jeffrey putting on a suit, right? But it's that focus,
Exactly.
right? It's that focus on not the experience of life, but the feelings, the psychology being a locus for the self-improvement. Becoming more efficient, and so forth, and so Kibner is an interesting character. It's hard to. He's not as much of a character as I think some people think he. I mean, he certainly is he's a joke. He's part of a joke about self-help culture, but there's some complexity to Kibner too. At least in these early scenes, he's not
Absolutely.
a pod person at this point. He is trying to piece it through, but he does do something which you see throughout this film, which is every scene in this film, something weird is happening and someone's telling you don't panic. Right? Kibner's like, yeah, you know what? You're like one of I don't know, almost a dozen people I've heard this from. I think it's a hallucinatory flu. Don't panic, and you call the bureaucracy.
Don't fact check anything.
You call the bureaucracy. What is the bureaucracy? Don't panic. Just chill out. And so we get to this party, and one of the people there is kind of freaking out about this. Catherine. And Elizabeth sees her and thinks she's going through the same thing I am, and so Kibner tries to do his little thing, and I think Matthew starts to break from Kibner at this point. He's like, you're not listening to these people, right? And so part of Kibner has this calm sense that he's the person that knows what's going on, and that's starting to fall away. And where it really falls away is finally at the mud baths.
Yeah, the Belichick mud baths.
Yeah,
and I think this is one of the things that Kaufman does in this film that I really like. And to your point, it's why maybe watching it time after time, you pick up different things because you know where things are going. But he slowly, unveils how these pod people actually work. And it's at the baths, which are all green lit, which are perfect mud baths. I mean,
and talk about most
place.
70s moment, like mud baths. I saw that and I'm like,
Wonderful.
Oh my God. Like, how could people, but it's sort of like, it's a little bit of a dingier place, but it's still like that.
Totally.
still that spa idea, right? It's still like, oh, I'm going to, it's that 70s wellness culture that has this faddishness to it. And you're sitting like in this tiled bath full of mud, and like,
Yeah.
again, on a second watch, very on the nose.
Totally. And not as soulless as it would be
Not as
today.
soulless.
Like today it would be
Oh,
completely
that's true.
clean,
That's true.
completely
We kind of do
sterile.
like that. Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it did have a little bit more
Yeah,
vibe, even when they were selling out. They were a little better in the 70s. And so basically, this is where we're introduced to Veronica
yeah.
Cartwright. And Veronica Cartwright is another fascinating character for me because, you could see her as a kid growing up in Bodega Bay as part of the
Yeah.
Birds. And then you see her like McCarthy coming from
Right.
Bodega Bay up to San
In the sort of
Francisco, you
extended
know?
conspiracy horror universe, right, 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 right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So here she is. She's got, she's rejected her
yeah.
mom and her brother. She's hooking up with a poet. She has a crazy job as a
I love
basically
these.
mud
So
bath
the
massage.
poet, as we mentioned, the poet is Jeff Goldblum. I love this couple. I love this couple. I love both
Yeah,
couples
they're
here.
good.
First of all, I love the intimacy of Sutherland, of Sutherland and I keep saying Elizabeth. Shoot, what's her name? I mean, Brooke Adams.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
great.
I
Yeah.
love the intimacy that Sutherland and Brooke Adams have in their relationship. Um, but Nancy and Jack, Jeff Goldblum and I got to get the name straight here.
Veronica
Veronica
Cartwright.
Cartwright, yeah. Um, they also have a great relationship in this weird way. Like Goldblum is a poet, likes to talk about old San Francisco, who's just permanently grumpy. It's just like he's
Yeah.
just no one understands, it's genius and like, oh, this everyone's reading self-help books now and no one's, it takes him like Leonard Nimoy puts out a book every 6 months. It takes him a year to write one line, you know. Um, and Nancy's like a doer. She's very practical, She's very
Yeah.
practical, and he's very in somewhere else. And but somehow they like each other, and I just love them
Yeah.
together. And it makes a thing that comes up later here, but it's actually Jack that is the first that we really fully see the pod process with. Because what happens is in the baths, someone brings in one of these pod spores, and then they find a fully formed or nearly, no, a half formed figure that kind of looks like Jack forming and growing in there in a sort of a striking moment when the body opens its eyes. Jack has a nosebleed, and this thing has nose at the same time, and it confirms that these things are connected. That this is a copy of him growing. Um, Matthew goes home. He finds that there is a duplicate growing next to Elizabeth, and so now we're accelerating, right? He destroys that
Yes.
duplicate. He carries her out. He saves her. We're starting to see that it's when people fall asleep that these things grow. And at the same time, we're still seeing in this segment, we're still seeing again throughout the movie, like they call the police. Police arrive at the baths. They find nothing. They say can't find anything here that looks like a body. And so the police. Kibner still telling people not to freak out at Elizabeth's apartment. He's Kibner saying, "Hey, my friend."
He even comes to the baths,
Yeah,
right? And he's like,
it's
wait,
like my friend's
don't
had some
worry.
emotional experiences recently, right? That said, Kibner for a little bit seems to be on their side. He's a little standoffish. Seems to be on side. He's got to go look into it. These other four are wandering around. Nancy realizes the flowers are connected to this. Now, Nancy, unlike heralded hero of this thing, right? The sort of a central figure that is always on the periphery, but like she's the person that figures everything out. Like it's fascinating
Yes.
to me. Like you've got You've got Sutherland's character here, who's a health inspector, who's supposed to have this minute mind for detail. He can spot a rat turd and soup and whatever. The whole city's been overtaken. He hasn't noticed any of it. Right?
Exactly.
You've got Elizabeth, who finds this, knows something about the plants and whatever, looks it up. Doesn't occur to her that the plant she brought into her home might have something to do with this, right? Nancy's there. Nancy's figuring all this out, right? Nancy's like, she's like, we'll talk about this when we get to our quick rounds. But Nancy's on top of all of this. Matthew's calling everybody you can think of. Everyone's telling him, hey, you know what? Don't panic. Like, we're going to deal with it. This is a film, as we'll talk about too, that deals with bureaucracy. And this is part of what the bureaucracy is there to absorb, right? The bureaucracy is there to absorb the emotion, to absorb the panic, right? And then to dispose of it, just like those pods, right? It's the bureaucracy is this cushion, right, between people having very real experiences, seeing what's wrong, in something being done about that. And then finally, I think that as we know that something is completely wrong here, the pods grow in Matthew's backyard, shaped to everybody that's in that house's bodies, in a very hallucinatory scene. He wakes up, sees all of these. Someone wakes Matthew up. He destroys the pods, calls the police, and the dispatcher says, "Wait there, Mr. Bennell." And Matthew, in sort of one of these classic, this is where conspiracy thriller comes in, one of these classic conspiracy thriller lines. He says, "Wait there, Mr. Bennell." And Sutherland says, "How do you know my name?" And Nancy said, Nancy on top of it. Nancy, the only person that is freaking getting it throughout this entire film. He's there. So the phone says, wait there, Mr. Bennell. Sutherland's like, "How do you know my name?" And Nancy is like, "They're pods, all of them."
Oh, exactly.
Oh my God!
The conspiracy theorist is right in this movie.
Listen to Nancy, man. So anyway, trying Washington, power's cut. They flee out into the city, and then we have Jeff Goldblum's like defining moment here, which I love. Just such a setup for it. But Jim, why don't you take what Jack does as they move out in the city and are surrounded by some of these pods?
Well, he basically takes one for the team.
Yeah.
Right? So they're all trapped in, like, it seems like a wharf and Embarcado. I don't know what that would be called specifically in San Francisco. So they're stuck. And so he's like, "You all stay here." And then he goes, "Come get me, police officers." And then this, like, stream of pod people, who's very reminiscent of the 1958 or 56 version directed by Don Siegel.
Yeah, there's not like a slow on that element. There's not sort of like a slow zombies, fast zombies things happening here. On a lot of the the sort of how they act and whatever. Those pieces are relatively similar between the two.
Yeah, they are. And they almost come at them similarly, too, where the community starts to come at them. And so Jack, he runs and yells and screams, so they follow him so that Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland's characters can kind of escape. I love that Veronica Cartwright is like, "Jack!" and follows him. Yeah. Like, she doesn't take, like he's doing one for the team, but she won't have it. Yeah. So you basically separate these
two,
now.
Yeah. And so
and you follow Donald and Brooke.
They make that last big move. They're going to go to the airport. They get in a cab, kind of famously, in another nod to the first one. The cabbie here that is driving them to the airport is Don Siegel, who directed the first one. Part, again, of Kaufman's, what Kaufman said in a lot of the material around this was he hated it when people did reboots and kind of buried the influence of the first one, didn't pay credit to it. And so he wanted all throughout this to make sure he was paying credit to what he considered to be a really masterful storytelling in the first one. So he has McCarthy, he has Siegel playing these roles in it as nods. And so they don't make it through the taxi windows. They see pods on flap. They're finally seeing stuff. Right? This stuff has been going on. They see pods on flatbeds right out in the open. That's how they do it. That's how they spread it. The radios are chattering names and destinations. The whole bureaucracy has now been infiltrated. It is bureaucratic capture. If you're familiar with the terms discussing what is happening today, it is bureaucratic capture of the state here. All the machinery of bureaucracy has now been captured. It is now working to the benefit of the pods. They go to the health department, which I think is an interesting on the nose thing, to try to stay awake at the health department, take some speed, and then they're confronted by Kibner. And here is where Nimoy again shines. And I'll let you handle the Nimoy piece here, Jim.
Yeah, so Nimoy comes up to the apartment and he's basically giving Brooke Adams' character drugs to go to sleep. He's telling them all, look, you're crazy. I have connections. Let me call my person, who's high up. We'll figure this out. And he kind of, does what he did. And you said so brilliantly, just kind of all the panic that is everywhere now clear. Yeah. He's basically almost trying to acknowledge, but still saying, let me talk to someone. Everyone sit, stay cool. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. Leaves and has, Jeffrey, Brooke Adams' husband, in the actual car. And it's actually the scene right here. You can see it from the back. It's this scene. Let me just remove this for a second. This is him. And he's basically like, these bastards will turn them to bad people sooner or later, which I just love.
It's inevitable. And so, like, that's the look in that. The look in that still. The reason why that still is so great is it's like casual. So it's like casual Nimoy there. He's got that suit. You got Jeffrey in the car with his suit. It's like, you know what?
Oh, so
hey, man, catch you later.
And we will. And that's when you realize that he is a pod person already.
He's a pod person.
All what he's been feeding them when he was up there was basically, all of what you're saying, that bureaucratic double speak, trying to get them to just go to sleep so that they can kind of join the rest of them. And I don't know, have you seen that show Pluribus?
No, I haven't.
Okay. That's why you're not talking about Pluribus.
Okay.
Pluribus is essentially the next chapter of this. Yeah. It is interesting. Pluribus is absolutely just taken Invasion of the Body Snatchers from Kaufman and put it in the same kind of context, but the aliens are much nicer.
Yeah.
They're just happier. They're like vegans, and they're really happy and nice. Yeah. But that's it. Pluribus is basically Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Well, I'll check it out. One of the interesting pieces of Kaufman is Kaufman did comment on this film in 2019. And he commented on what he seemed to be commenting. I don't know for sure that this was his context. He didn't go into too much detail. But he seemed to be commenting really on some of these online dynamics and saying that, hey, look, we're kind of looking at the pod people now, where just people find this sort of consensus online and kind of like coalesce, and everybody starts saying the same thing, and embracing this sort of sameness. So I thought that it is interesting.
And I think Pluribus is doing that, but is doing that in relationship to AI.
In relationship to AI,
so
all right.
It is super.
Are we feeding? We're feeding the monster here using our show notes.
Well, I think it's super interesting. Your show notes we have to talk about because that's brilliant. But I think it's playing on that moment. And I think, what would you do if you took Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is dealing with the change, like we talked about in San Francisco, from the hippies and that kind of reaction, or that revolutionary moment, to the reactionary yuppies that are going to come in the 80s. That's that change that is the horror of this movie. And I think Pluribus is doing that in a very different way with the horror and the kind of, preoccupations of our moment, using the same vision of aliens coming and kind of taking over everybody, except for 6 people. And, those 6 people have to negotiate with them because they're not violent, nor, they're basically happy vegans. So how do they just get these 6 people to join them? It's interesting. Anyway,
I'll check. I don't have Apple TV, but I'll find some way to watch it. It's
There is a way out
you
there.
get you finally have Kibner corners Elizabeth and Matthew up, I believe, in the health department, and this is where you get the sort of the famous Nimoy lines. Nimoy says, "Hey, look, um, you don't have to leave the city. I mean, why are you trying to leave the city? You can be here. You become a pod person. Nothing changes. You have the same life. You'll be born into an untroubled world. You won't have anxiety. You won't have fear. You won't have hate." And so, again, this idea of the annihilation of the interior life is something experienced, and really focusing on that as a problem to be solved, as sort of this locus of self improvement. And the most famous line, of course, he said, Elizabeth says, "I hate you." He says, "We don't hate you. There's no need for hate now or love." And that's kind of the idea here. And I mean, it's kind of a commonplace in a lot of films that you can't take out the bad without taking out the good. That these two things are the same two sides of the same coin. But the
And
delivery here,
anyone who has seen Pluribus
yeah,
right now is like,
yeah,
exactly. So like this whole moment is exactly like and that's what's
yeah,
alien, right? You can't have love or hate
yeah,
anymore. It is truly alien in that people are completely
yeah,
disaffected and what that
yeah,
means. And so it really does. It's it's an interesting
yeah,
shift in terms of what it means for our own moment to think through this and how it would be a very different thing, because 78 is so important here,
yeah,
right? Like the changes that are happening in the 70s and the paranoia that you frame with as we're moving into the noir sci-fi of the 80s, like this is
yeah,
important. This starts that
yeah.
shift. I think there's something to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a sort of self-reflection about that I don't know, there's something kind of meta about it. But there's definitely like a shift there. Um, plowing through the beats, because we talked so much, which is great. But just, I mean, they lock Nimoy in a freezer. He does the little pod scream, pod scream. Famous piece of this too, which when we get to the physical release, and we will get to the physical release, we'll talk about the sound. Sound is such a big piece of this film. They have the same sound
Yeah.
editor that they had on Star Wars, who came up with the lightsaber hum, who came up with R2D2, and he applies it here to horror, and he's just as genius in this context.
Yeah.
Nancy reappears. We meet Nancy, and Nancy is still alive. Jack has obviously Jack. We already learned had been taken. He become Pod Jack. He was with Kibner. Nancy reappears. She has survived. She reveals that she's found a way to survive. You can just look like you have no emotion, walk around, just act like them. They can't seem to detect that, right? And so again, Nancy on the ball, like just like the whole
Exactly.
movie,
She
like
is doing the
listen to
work.
why is no one listening to Nancy? But she's figured it out, right? Like it's weird. It's like we're not actually following the hero of this film. This is like the side quest. This is almost like we're seeing the hero's journey from everyone else's perspective, and we're just bumping into this hero that's popping in from time to time. And so they walk around the pods. They have blank faces. They're able to get there. It breaks. Elizabeth sees a dog hybrid that has a human face. She freaks out. They see them again. They find a warehouse where thousands of pods are cultivated, and they're like, "This is where they grow them. This is where they're cultivating them. It's now become factory farming of these pods." And so they decide that they're going to address this. Night falls. They're trying to stay up. Matthew hears "Amazing Grace" on like bagpipes, I think, from docked
Yeah.
ships, and he's like, "Ships, we can get out on the ships, right?" Which is kind of silly to think that they didn't get to the ships already. If he had Nancy there, Nancy would be like, "No, don't you understand? They've done it all." But he doesn't have Nancy there. So Donald Sutherland is an idiot, runs off to the ships, leaves Elizabeth behind, comes back. Elizabeth has fallen asleep. She's been potted. He picks her up, crumbles in his hands, and Elizabeth's duplicate arises. And then we sort of break in. Matthew tries to light the warehouse on fire. Elizabeth, follows him, points at him. Everybody attacks him. He does seem to get the warehouse of these pods on fire. And then, just in a masterful stroke in terms of the direction and the point of view of this movie, we see the warehouse on fire. And the next day, we see the city still running on schedule. And we find Matthew in his office, like clipping things. And then we see him walking with a flat expression, just like Nancy has said. And then I'll hand it's your choice. I'll hand the final moments of this film to you. But everything here, we're just asking. Like, I was watching this with my wife Nicole, and Nicole asked what everybody asks at this point. It's like, is he faking it? Like, is he faking? He's faking it, right? Is he faking it?
It's so brilliant.
It does not give it away. Like, everything here is structured so you don't know. But I'll hand it to you, Jim.
And one of the things I really like about this scene, I mean, for me, the most memorable scene of the film is this final scene. And no one on the set knew how it was going to end. The producers didn't know.
Donald Sutherland informed the night before, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, he kept this, him and the writer kept this, they kept it like a secret until the very end. And so what happens is he's in front of the San Francisco City Hall. The trees are brilliantly pruned of any green. So what has been, the city has been green everywhere. I mean, there's been emphasis on green in every shot. And at this point, it's like, to your point earlier on, it's done. The conversion has been completed. So there's no more green left on the trees. And Donald Sutherland is in this brilliant scene in front of City Hall. Veronica Cartwright comes and, looks at him and is like, psst, psst, hey, hey, it's me. And like, he turns slowly and you're waiting for it. And then he does, that Ben Burtt scream, and points. And then obviously the idea is the last one will, if not now, soon be converted. And it's just a great, it's a completely hopeless film. It's as if the new Hollywood still had breath after Star Wars. It's as if it could have its last breath before this was impossible.
Well, it's interesting, right? Too. My understanding is they wanted Kaufman to film an alternate. They wanted him to film an alternate ending.
I'm sure.
And they put some pressure on him to film an alternate. Because, you run it and you do your tests and maybe the audience does not react the way you like. And so you want them to have an alternate ending in the can. And Kaufman refused. Never filmed an alternate ending to this. Never. It's the one piece of the film that he absolutely stuck. Like, this piece of the film does not change. It ends with Donald Sutherland, doing this act. And you mentioned Ben Burtt. A lot of people here might not know Ben Burtt. So I don't know if you want to take Ben Burtt and talk a little bit about Ben Burtt. But Ben Burtt, absolutely, when we'll talk in a minute about who won the film. And Ben Burtt is a contender in that. This has great acting, great writing. But Ben Burtt, why don't you tell people who Ben Burtt is?
So Ben Burtt is a sound designer. And sound designer wasn't really even a thing until Francis Ford Coppola gave the designation to Walter Murch when he did the sound for The Conversation. Because, The Conversation is a film all about sound. And this film alludes to The Conversation and San Francisco's role in film in the 70s in some brilliant ways. I just absolutely love that piece. But Ben Burtt was basically, he came up, he did Death Race 2000.
Oh, I did not know that. Was that? Film. Oh my gosh.
Yes. It's his first film. His second film is Star Wars.
If there's a 4K of Death Race, we're getting that. I just want to be clear.
I agree. So he did, R2-D2. He did, as you said, the lightsaber hum. He did the famous Wilhelm scream that he played around with the when people get shot. So he's just, and then he went on to Empire Strikes Back and you name it. Outside of Walter Murch, I think he's considered one of the greatest. And
one of his big innovations was finding, a lot of people would, for example, in sci-fi until then, people had used synthesizer noises and things like that. And like he was the person that's like, you know, what if we took the sound of a bird and what if we slowed it down, right? What if we
Yeah,
took
cool.
the sound of aluminum vibrating and we hyped that up and it became the pulse of like a laser gun, right? Like he realized you could take all these organic sounds and if you played with them enough, they would sound very otherworldly. And that's what we get to with this scream is the scream. I forget what he's layered on there, but he's layered on like the sound of
Yeah,
pigs and some other things. And he's run it through and he's spit it up. He's
yeah.
slowed it down. And he's put high pass and low fat pass filters on all of this. And it is one of the most disturbing sounds that I think film has
And
produced.
absolutely, and I think John Carpenter in 19 in The Thing in 1982 stole it.
Yeah.
Basically, like when they
Yeah.
have that pointing
Yeah.
and that thing. It's like this is a moment for sci-fi
Yeah.
horror, and I think the scream, to your point, is a huge part of
Yeah.
that.
Other pieces too in this thing as the pods are developing, you hear this sort of burbling, hallucinatory sort of sound that again is sort of encompassing. And we'll get to the physical release again in a second. We'll talk a little bit about the two different tracks on this release.
So
But and maybe we do that now, and then we can come to
yeah,
our quick round of questions.
I'll,
Yeah,
I'll tell you a quick
yeah,
little story, Mike, and
yeah,
then you can go. I got the so I saw that Mike had the 4K for this film, and I was like, I'd really love to talk about Invasion of Body Snatchers. I didn't have the 4K, but I bought it, and I was in Italy, so I got the German version. And so what's interesting is the German version was put out by Cape Light, and there's a bunch of different versions. The Arrow 4K, I think, is even better. Um, so there's like several 4K versions of this film. But this has not only the Philip Kaufman commentary, which we'll talk about, but it also has a commentary by two German scholars, Ulrich von Bloom and Patrick Bennett, who talk about this and the scholarly implications, the context, all of this. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I get to hear these German
How was it?
scholars talk about it. I put it on and it's in German. So I'm like, oh, no big deal. I'll put on the subtitles. There's all sorts of audio on DVDs, right? No audio for English commentary. So I sat there, I was like, oh, I don't know German that well. So I can't tell you anything about that commentary. So I hope you have more than me, Mike.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, this has a bunch of things. So we could talk about the history of this release. I mean, obviously, released multiple times. This 4K release from Kino Lorber is if you were here last week, you know that Arrow Video is a company that throws a lot of goodies in their stuff, right? You get a poster, maybe some postcards and stuff. Kino Lorber like does none of that.
I think you called it a Happy Meal.
Yeah, a
And
Happy
you
Meal.
were
Yeah.
100%
Yeah,
right when
Arrow
you called
produces
it
a
a
little
Happy
Happy
Meal.
Meal for you, right? It's very much sort of a collector's paradise. Kino Lorber does none of that. But here's what Kino Lorber does. Kino Lorber does some of the best remastering that you'll see in the business. As a matter of fact, the newer Arrow release, so when Arrow released their 4K, they licensed the Kino Lorber restoration. So the new Arrow release has the Kino Lorber 4K. Now, this is incredibly important. I mean, we're always going to hype up these things. There's two things going on with a 4K, and sometimes people don't distinguish those two things. One is when you're producing a 4K, you go back and you do a lot of things right. So it's not just about having the 4K. It's about the fact, hey, Kino Lorber is going to put out this 4K. So when they're going back, they're doing a restoration on the stereo soundtrack, right? The original Dolby, the original Dolby stereo that came out in the 70s, which would have had a center channel, the two right channels, and one sort of mono surround track in it. So they're doing that, right? They're putting out a 5.1, right, with the bass, a little more separation. They're restoring the film. They're redoing something called color grading. The color grading is just like, what is the tonality of the colors? Are they warm? Are they cold? And so forth. And on this particular release, they have a color grading that that was approved by Kaufman himself. So they went through and they said, "Hey, we're going to regrade this." this is a big issue with 70s films, is that a lot of the 70s films, they deteriorated, right? The prints, so you got to take the restore from the master. And they don't really reflect the intention in some cases of the directors as to what those colors would be. And so if you've seen this on Prime or on Tubi, it's available on Tubi if you want to see on Tubi, you'll see a version of this where the colors are not warm. I mean, it's still like Tubi, you're still getting a high def take on this, right? But the sort of saturation and richness is not there. On the 4K, you're seeing like a richness to these colors, right? Like the greens, right? A depth to it, a sort of warmth. And until that final scene where everything is stripped and everything is yellow, right? So these early scenes are, it's really an entirely different experience than you might have had before. And then I'll say one other thing is that there is some debate on this about whether to listen to the 5.1 track or to listen to the original stereo. Sound is such a huge piece of this. In the original stereo, those hallucinatory scenes in the baths are structured around that sound mixed through that stereo. So there's a lot of people that say that they prefer the restored stereo on this over the 5.1 upgrade. I think an Atmos track would have been really nice. If anybody at Kino Lorber is listening,
that's going to be an ongoing theme.
Yeah, I'm gonna say
where's my Atmos?
but a really nice restoration, and so that's me doing the sort of laundry list QVC thing on this disc.
I love it. That's great.
Jim, you watched it. You've probably I think I'd watched this once, probably closer to the 70s than now. Before I saw this again on 4K. I think you've seen it a number of times in between. So what was your experience with this master?
Yeah.
What struck you about it?
I own this one on VHS, DVD, and now 4K, thanks to you. And I think I am happy I did. Yeah, I mean, the point you brought up when we were talking about Outland really was important for me when I was watching this film, actually. In fact, the first 15 to 20 minutes of this film, when there's these tremendous amount of dark scenes in the apartment as he's setting everything up. And usually if you're watching that on the TV, that will just be either black or even pixelated somehow, because it just can't deal. The compression can't deal with that. Whereas this disc really captures, to steal a title from Tim Lucas's biography of Mario Bava, all the colors of the dark, right? It really captures the details of these colors that are happening, and it really highlights this vision early on in this movie that it's as much a noir as it is a science fiction film. And that comes later with the shadows and stuff, and it looks beautiful. But I did watch it in stereo because I don't have a 5 surround system yet. And it sounded amazing. I have a pretty decent stereo to run it through. But it looked gorgeous. I mean, the coloration, the warmness of it, the ability, and I'll tell you, one of the striking scenes for me, and Philip Kaufman, when I was watching it with commentary, was like, I don't know why everybody made such a big deal about, when Sutherland put a hoe through his character's head. I'm like, dude, I've seen a lot of horror movies. That's a rough scene.
The scenes that strike me in terms of the color grading, there's a scene on his back patio that is just lit with little patio lights. And so it's just very dark with these little patio lights. And I actually watched that scene on the Prime high def, but not the color restoration. And it was just not it didn't strike me as cold. It didn't strike me as dull, but it didn't strike me as warm and inviting. And actually on this color grading, that scene, it feels like you're at your friend's backyard. It's one of those nights you've got the little patio lights on. It kind of fades into darkness. You can kind of see the little swaying of leaves, very in the background, just coming out from the darkness, and just a warmth in an inviting piece. And especially that's one of the most sort of memorable chemistry scenes between Sutherland um,
Yeah.
and
And Brooke Adams. Yeah.
Adams, yeah, and it's just even more so. It just it really helps you because we're on a trajectory in this film to that yellow skied, trees are bare, in the plaza, pig squeal moment, right? We're on a trajectory to that, but you don't fully get that with the non 4K because you don't have the warmth of all those apartment scenes, of all those patio scenes, of the ways these colors are warm, and you're really losing something by the time you end up at that very yellow bureaucratic world at the end that you don't sense otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the other thing I will add to that is, the soundtrack. We
Yeah.
talked about Ben Burtt's sound effects, and I guess there was a psychiatrist who was a friend of
Oh yeah, yeah. A jazz musician
Kaufman's, who
also.
just
Yeah,
jazz musician who did this one
yeah,
soundtrack, which Kaufman says may be one of the greatest soundtracks of the '70s. Is like certainly of my
yeah,
movies, but maybe even of the '70s. Pretty big claim, and he doesn't seem one to kind of be hyperbolic. And when I heard the soundtrack through speakers on this system versus when I was watching it through Prime, it was night
yeah.
and day. Like the sound was night and day. And you can really see where the sound effects and the music are starting to work together to create this sense of paranoia brilliantly. Now, I might be also influenced by the commentary and stuff, and I'm sure I am to some degree, but it was not lost on
Yeah.
me with the
Yeah.
sound once I've heard
No,
that. You know
the
what I
score
mean?
is really interesting. The score is one of those sort of transitional scores where they're combining some elements of synthesizers with traditional sort of symphonic sound. So you have this Prophet 5, which is very famous synthesizer, if you know anything about synthesizers. This Prophet 5
I don't.
synthesizer, and you're integrating that with this sort of symphonic brass strings and so forth and creating something that is it just has an eeriness to it in a lot of spaces. But also, I mean, it's also like I mean, it does everything a score should do in the different moments. It's not a single thing. The score is not a single thing. But what Kaufman had actually asked, his name was Denny Zeitlin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right.
There it is. Yeah,
Uh,
that's
he
right.
said that he wanted Zeitlin to blur the line between score and sound effect, right? So here's a quote from Denny Zeitlin. One of the interesting challenges this film had was in Phil's idea that at times music needed to morph into sound effects. It needed to morph back into music. And so it's kind of a brilliant conception of how to use this score that kind
Brilliant.
of comes in as a score and then kind of goes out as a sound effect and then comes in as a score. And you see that especially in these pod growth scenes, and of course that final scream where we have that. And then of course, if I'm remembering correctly, the scream and then nothing, no score on the outro. I think I don't quote me on that, but I think there's no score. I think there's a scream and then this beautiful soundscape that Zeitlin had done throughout the film. Scream, silence, no
Done.
ending score. If I'm wrong about that, I'm very embarrassed. But I think that is my memory of what happened.
That, that's all right, Michael. We won't hold this against you. So one of the things, and I mean, this is a great conversation. It's been fun, and I know we're
Yeah, we're
pushing. I
pushing.
have no time limit, but I want to be mindful of that. But one of my takes on this film, after listening to the great commentary, I mean, let me just say about this: this 4K is worth just listening to Philip Kaufman. Really
Well,
smart,
yep,
really sits down with you. I've heard a lot of bad commentaries, a
yeah,
lot. Philip Kaufman's commentary is
yeah,
awesome. He talks everything from like the quotidian, like this is how we did the shot, this is how we set up this lighting. Like he'll talk as much as you want about the specifics, and then he'll quickly be able to, kind of zoom in and out on the kind of theoretics and what he was thinking. And it's just a really nice. But what he gave me through a concept of all the different things is that San Francisco as the alternative Hollywood was a thing
oh
for a
yeah,
bit,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
Like it was a thing. Zoetrope was there. You know, obviously you got people like Murch, you got people like, you know, Ben Burtt, you got people like Coppola, you have people like Robert. Why was Robert Duvall, you know, playing a crazy priest in the beginning? Because there was a kind of space
yeah,
there. And that space that ultimately went with Zoetrope, and he was talking about how that was a kind of shame, but also talking about the changing of the city
yeah,
with the Transamerica
yeah,
building and all of this kind of reference back, talking about how this was a low budget film made for $350,000, which was
yeah,
nothing then. And all the other money went to kind of publicizing all the stuff. But he had zero money to make this movie. Really kind of pointed to this like moment for them and for many of his friends and writers and filmmakers and other creatives that they had in San Francisco, and they lost it. And Michael, who did they lose it to? They lost it to the fucking tech
oh,
company.
jeez.
I mean, that's the next piece
Yeah,
of this. They lost it to Elon Musk. They
yeah.
lost it to Twitter, to Facebook. San Francisco got eaten up by a whole
It's
different
it's in
kind of
you know
pod
it's
people.
funny. I hadn't thought about fast forwarding it all the way, right? Like I thought about, oh well, it's San Francisco in the '80s, like this newer world. But you're right. I mean, what it moves into is, are these tech companies and a lot of money, a lot of money,
Yeah.
and something very different. That world in San Francisco of these quirky people, these hippies, these beatniks, these weirdos, really pushed out. Really pushed out by
Yeah.
the wealth in that town. All right, we're going to do our quick round of questions, even though we're pushing it. First question:
Who cares?
Philip Seymour Hoffman. What role do we give him in this film?
Oh, he is gotta be. Well, he would be a good Kibner after watching The
Yeah,
Master, but he'd also be a good Jeffrey.
yeah, yeah. I think that's true. He would be a good Jeffrey. I was thinking Kibner. And partially
Yeah,
because of the
Kibner
Master
is. Yeah,
reference there, but
I agree.
I could see Jeffrey. Yeah, I could absolutely
Yeah,
like I'm looking at that thing, seeing him in the car behind him. That could absolutely be PSA.
I could see him Kibner though with that little
Oh,
hand
oh,
cover,
I
whatever
know.
the
And
hell
again,
that.
like the Master reference comes out there. Okay, one
Totally.
Oscar for this movie. You get one Oscar to give this movie. Who are you going to give it to?
I mean, I really do think after our talking about, I mean,
There's so many.
it's
So,
hard. There is so
so
many.
let,
I
let's
love
do
the
let's do some of
photography.
the
We didn't even talk about the
we did.
photography.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the guy who did The Godfather 2 basically did the
yeah,
photography, and how much of that is
yeah,
handheld is
yeah,
amazing. But it was probably up against so many great films because the '70s was so full of
yeah,
good films. I don't know if it's sound. It's definitely not special effects. So I
yeah.
don't know if it's
It's not special
sound
effect.
or if it's
I
if it's.
don't
It
think
could be writing
the,
too,
the
though.
writing is amazing. Um,
So I don't know. It's
I
hard.
I think
It should have gotten several.
it's a good performance by Sutherland, but I mean, like we've got better. Like like
Yeah.
a lot of times with the Oscar, it's like he'll come around again. We'll get him. I don't know. Did Sutherland ever get?
Hmm.
Did Sutherland ever get an Oscar?
Good question.
We
I
should
do
have that
not
in our
know.
notes. We
I mean,
don't.
they had talked about he just came back from
Yeah,
Europe. He had done his Europe thing with like Fellini and all
yeah,
that, and he kind of came off his tour with the greats. But he was good. Antonella, my special lady friend, loved
yeah.
Sutherland in this. She was like, he sold
He
me
he
on
is
it, like the whole
so
film. So
charming and like so effortlessly. He's got like a little touch of vulnerability under him.
yeah,
It's
he's
just
good.
at the right level. And again, the chemistry there, just beautiful. I think
Yes,
Nimoy is good in
agreed.
this, but I'm not giving him the Oscar. I honestly think it might be between the score by Zeitlin and the sound design.
Yeah,
I don't know.
sound design you could
I'm
make
gonna
an
go with
argument
it.
for. It's a
Yeah, it's
hard
a
one.
hard one.
It's a hard
It's a hard
question.
one. You know what? I'm gonna go with the sound design. Yeah, because most memorable ending scene, it got to be one of the top 10
Yeah,
most memorable ending scene of
agreed.
any film, and it hinges on the sound design. The sound design is not right at that ending scene. That ending scene is nothing. right? And so he
Yeah.
creates
If he's
one of the
just
most
like
memorable moments
Veronica.
in film out of whatever his concoction of like pig squeals and like sloshing mud and like gurgling water, whatever he was doing in the studio there. In a genius that I learned on the set, they used to test him. They used to say, hey, they used to take like a tape from the Warner library or from any library, and they play him the sound, and he'd be like, oh, that's a door slam. That's from Warner. That's like 1938 Warner. Like no like encyclopedic knowledge of this entire library of effects. Could like recognize a door slam, recognize the Willem scream. I think we got to give it. I think we got to give it to sound design. Last question.
Ben Burtt, come up and take your Academy
Come up
Award.
and take your Academy. I don't know if he did. I should have looked up who won these. Maybe he was nominated. And then the final question is, what character or subplot do we give the 6-episode Netflix series to? I think this was so obvious.
Veronica Cartwright.
It's Veronica Cartwright.
Veronica Cartwright.
She is Sarah
Absolutely.
Connor in this film. It's like this is like what the world looked like. Like this is what Sarah Connor looked like to other people that weren't Sarah Connor, right? Like we're seeing it from like Donald Sutherland side, and Sarah Connor is up there, like they're all pods, they're all in on it. Here's how you walk. I'll show you how. She's like give it to her. I would watch.
You're a Netflix exec.
What's that?
You're a Netflix exec, Mike. I'm coming to you. You're a Netflix exec. Here it is. You got Veronica. She's a kid. She's in Bodega Bay. A lot of shit happens. She gets fucked up. She comes, she goes through this hippie exchange in the 60s, right? She finds herself, and then she gets a mud bath. And then what happens is these pods come down, and they take over San Francisco. Like, it's a great 6-part series, and we could connect so many dots.
Yeah, I think, and I'd watch the hell out of it. I don't know who we put. I don't know who we put in that role.
I love you finding her as the new star of this film. Yes. Like she's the unrecognized star.
It's so funny watching it. It's like please just listen to her.
Yeah.
Like
you're right.
So I think that's
when you're right, and damn it, you're right, Mike.
So that's the questions. That's the pod on pods. Again, if you want to run out and get this Kino Lorber thing, it's a Kino Lorber. It's a dual disc. In the U.S., it's a dual disc thing. They put the extras on it. Like a lot of Kino Lorber, you got your 4K here. It's a triple layer, 100 gigabyte disc. And, right, triple layer. You can see it on the back, 3 barcodes. I got to teach people how to do this. Because I'll tell you, sometimes you pick up something. I
was looking at
and it's a 4K.
And I couldn't do it.
It's a 4K, and like they're doing a dual layer 4K, and which can be okay if they're not cramming a bunch of other stuff. Kino Lorber also is very cautious, and they'll do on ones where there's a lot of extras, and there's a lot of extras for this one. They'll do a second disc and put the extras on the second disc, so that they're not messing up the encoding. The bit rate on this is going to be consistently somewhere in the 90s, like 90 megabits a second. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.